The Panasonic Lumix GH5 came out at the start of 2017 and has been hugely popular, by far the most popular Lumix camera that there has ever been. In the 3.5 years since it was released, Panasonic have released several cameras that could have been very interesting for GH5 owners to upgrade to, but with the new S5, we think they've hit the nail on the head. So, to start with, we need to go back to the roots of what made people fall in love with the GH5 so much in the first place. From the many GH5 customers that I've spoken to over the last few years, the main reason that they're still happily using this camera to this day is its practicality. The size is great. You can use it with most lenses easily. It has the flip out screen, the XLR unit for the top, fantastic image stabilization, and great battery life. It's also incredibly flexible with its record formats. No record limits, all eye and long op choices, 4K 50p and 10-bit internal. For its time, it was incredibly far ahead of the market, and because of that, it just holds up really well even today. It's not, of course though, as we all know by now, a perfect camera, not by any stretch of the imagination. The main reason it was able to push forward those record formats was its smaller Micro Four Thirds sensor, but that comes with some natural drawbacks. And the main one for me is low light. It's just nowhere near as good as most other cameras on the market right now, and the reason I call this my main drawback for the camera is because it just goes against that practicality that makes the GH5 so excellent in all other areas. For the most part, you can take a GH5 anywhere, do anything, and it will just get the job done until the light starts to go. The other main complaint that I heard from customers was the autofocus performance. As autofocus technology has got better and better, it's been adopted more and more for professional use. Being able to just trust the camera to track a face for you while you focus on other things makes your life so much easier while working. Used in the right situation, it cuts down on the amount of mistakes and will mean other aspects of your project will benefit as you can pay attention more to the lighting, to the movement, to the interview, whatever else you happen to be doing while working. The GH5's autofocus was notoriously bad at the start, but since then, Panasonic have released update after update, making it better and better and better. However, it is still not realistically at the level where most customers find that they can really trust it and rely on it for most work. So that's the GH5, and now we have the S5. It's not, of course, a direct replacement. Instead, this is Panasonic's new entry-level option for their full-frame mirrorless lineup. But we think it shares a lot of the features that customers love about the GH5, while fixing some of those major drawbacks for the camera. First up, of course, you get that glorious full-frame sensor. This brings with it greater depth of field and a generally more pleasing image overall. These are some sample comparisons that we filmed around the showroom here at ProAV. The cameras are directly next to each other physically, with their respective kit lens options, the 12 to 60mm Leica on the GH5 and the new 20 to 60mm on the S5. Sure, you can use things like a speed booster and full frame glass to improve things here for this GH5, but out of the box, this shows just how different the images are between the two sensor sizes. The practicality is definitely still a huge plus point for the S5. It's much smaller than the S1 and the S1H, the higher up full frame options from Panasonic. And actually, it's even slightly smaller in some situations than the GH5 is. The image stabilization seems just as good despite its bigger sensor, and in my opinion, the ergonomics of the camera are just nicer overall than the GH5. I really like the feel of the camera in the hand, and I really like the tweaks they've done to the menus and the button placement. It just feels more comfortable to use for me than the GH5 did, especially paired with this 20 to 60mm kit lens, which for a full frame lens is remarkably small, lightweight and balanced with a small little camera like this. The GH5 has never had a natural lens pair like this one. And lots of customers didn't actually want to use these native Micro Four Thirds lenses, as they wanted to use speed boosters to get around the smaller sensor size of the camera. And that normally meant ending up with much larger glass, like the Sigma 18 to 35mm, for example, which was a popular choice, and that just felt nowhere near as well balanced. In our battery tests, the S5 is very comparable to the GH5. Both are lasting around 3 hours on a full charge, which is really impressive. Although at first glance the batteries do physically look the same, they are different. You're going to need new batteries with the S5. The GH5 ones won't even fit in the S5. However, strangely, you can use the S5 batteries in the GH5 if you really want to, and you'll get longer record times doing that, as these are slightly higher capacity than GH5 batteries. Both cameras have dual SD card slots, and both cameras can use the XLR top attachment. So, apart from your batteries, most of your other accessories from the GH5 will work with the S5. Record formats is one area though where the GH5 does still win out. The S5 can record forever with no limits, just like the GH5 can, but only in 8-bit, not in 10-bit. In 10-bit or in 4K 60p, you get a 30-minute record time limit. There's also no all-I codec options, which you get on the GH5, only long-op codecs. Plus, the full-size HDMI port that's there on the GH5 has been replaced by a little micro one. These are some of the drawbacks of going for the entry-level full-frame option rather than the top-of-the-line Micro Four Thirds option. They are a shame, but if you need all-I and a full-size HDMI, realistically you're going to have to step up to the S1 and the S1H for that. Something though from a future firmware update that does need to be mentioned here is that at some point this year, Panasonic are going to unlock 5.9K RAW recording over that little HDMI port, which should substantially increase the image quality that this camera is capable of. So even though it's only a micro little HDMI, this could be a real selling point for this camera, but make sure you use a cage with a locking port protector, as micro HDMI can break very easily indeed. So, you do have to say goodbye to a few nice record options when moving from a GH5 to an S5, but for me, it is easily worth it. And the main reason I say that is because of this low light noise performance. Take a look at these clips here. In 6400 ISO, the difference is day and night between the two cameras. The GH5 is starting to get very noisy, while the S5 is still perfectly clean. Up this to 12,800 and the GH5 is completely unusable now. Even at ISO 200, you can see the difference. Look at the shadows here when we blow up to 300%. The S5 just has a much lower noise floor overall because of its full frame sensor. And then there's the autofocus. We've released a whole video going into detail on the S5's autofocus performance. Panasonic have kept the same raw technology with a contrast-based autofocus system, but have completely rewritten their code from the ground up for this new camera. So the long story short is, although it's not as good as the hybrid autofocus technology that we've seen from Sony and Canon on their competing cameras, it's still much better than the GH5 was. Less twitching and flickering in the background areas, while face detect mode has been much improved. In some modes, it's actually very nearly as good as those hybrid option systems, but it's quite dependent on which format you're recording in, so it's not perfect. So, by upgrading to the S5, you get a camera that is in many ways just as practical as your GH5 has been, while significantly upgrading the image quality and low light performance because of its large full frame sensor with a dual native ISO. You get autofocus performance that, although it's not quite as good as some competitor options, you should be able to rely on for some situations, as long as you know how to get the most out of it and you pay attention to it. And you can get the option to unlock the full performance of your camera by using that raw output to up the image quality once again, once Panasonic release that firmware update later this year. If you want to buy an S5 for yourself, then head over to proav.co.uk, and if you're a current GH5 owner, let me know if upgrading would make sense for your work in the comment section down below. I'd be very curious to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.